The notary read my mother's will for 11 minutes. My name appeared exactly once, in a sentence that said I had already received my share through years of provided housing. I hadn't lived in my mother's house since I was 19 years old. I need to go back. Because what I discovered in the weeks after that reading didn't just break my heart. It rewrote every single memory I had of my entire childhood. My name is Carolyn, and my mother, Ruth, was the kind of woman other people called a saint. Quiet, capable, always the last one to sit down at dinner because she was still making sure everyone else had enough. She worked as a bookkeeper for a small construction firm in Dayton, Ohio, for 31 years. She clipped coupons. She drove a 2003 Buick until the transmission gave out. She told me every birthday that the most important thing she'd ever done was raise me right. My father died when I was 11. A heart attack on a Tuesday morning, right there in the driveway, and after that, it was just the two of us. I grew up watching my mother stretch every dollar like it was made of elastic. We didn't take vacations. We shopped at Goodwill and called it an adventure. But she owned her house outright, a small blue colonial on Mercer Street, and she had a savings account she added to every single month without fail. She called it our future, and she said it with that quiet, certain smile like she was keeping a promise. I left for college at 19 on a partial scholarship and 2 part-time jobs. I never asked my mother for money. Not once. I was proud of that. I built a decent life, married a good man named Paul, had 2 daughters, worked 20 years as a hospital administrator in Cincinnati. I called my mother every Sunday. I visited 6 times a year. I sat with her through a hip replacement and a bout of pneumonia and a terrible winter when she could barely get out of bed, and I drove 3 hours every single weekend to make sure she ate. She died in March, quietly, in her sleep. The hospice nurse called me at 4 a.m. I held her hand at the funeral and told myself she'd had a full life and that I had loved her well. I believed that completely. Right up until the notary's office, the house on Mercer Street, appraised at $214,000, had been signed over 18 months before her death to a woman named Diane Follett. The savings account, which held just over $91,000, had been drained in increments over 4 years and transferred to a joint account I had never heard of. There was a small life insurance policy, $15,000, and that went to a man named Greg Follett. There was also a car, a 2019 Honda Civic I didn't even know my mother owned, titled in the name of a teenage girl named Avery Follett. I sat in that notary's office and I said, very calmly, "Who are the Folletts?" The notary looked at me like I'd asked him to explain gravity. "They're your mother's family," he said. I had to ask him to repeat that. What unraveled over the next 3 weeks was this. My mother had a second family. Not a secret lover, not a fling, a fully constructed parallel life. Diane Follett, 53 years old, had been my mother's chosen daughter for over 2 decades. They'd met through a church outreach program in 1999 when Diane was a young single mother with a small boy named Greg. My mother had quietly, methodically inserted herself into their lives, paid for Greg's community college, co-signed Diane's apartment lease, sent Avery, Diane's granddaughter, birthday cards signed Grandma Ruth every year. Every single year. I found the cards when I went to clean out what was left of the house, which wasn't much because Diane had already been there. The closets were mostly empty. My mother's jewelry box, which had held a pearl necklace that belonged to my grandmother, and a gold bracelet my father gave her on their 10th anniversary, was gone. In the kitchen drawer where my mother used to keep her important papers, I found a single photograph I'd never seen before. My mother, laughing, her arm around Diane at what looked like a backyard barbecue. My mother looked happier in that photo than I could ever remember seeing her look in real life. That one almost finished me. I called my mother's oldest friend, a woman named Bet, who'd known her for 40 years. I kept my voice steady, and I asked Bet if she'd ever met the Folletts. There was a pause so long I thought the call had dropped. "Carolyn," Bet said finally, "your mother swore me to silence. She was afraid you'd be hurt." "She was right," I said. Bet told me everything. Ruth had started to see Diane as a kind of second chance, a woman who needed mothering and never pushed back, never disappointed, never grew up and moved 3 hours away and built her own life. Diane called her every single day, came to every doctor's appointment, sat with her every holiday. And my mother, lonely in ways I clearly hadn't understood, had slowly redirected everything. Her money, her time, her heart, toward people who simply stayed closer. "She loved you," Bet said, and I could tell she believed it. "She had a funny way of showing it," I said, and I hung up. I gave myself exactly 1 week to be devastated. I cried in the shower. I called Paul at midnight and just held the phone while he talked. I sat in my car in my own driveway for 40 minutes one evening, not able to go inside, not able to drive anywhere. I let myself feel all of it. The grief, the rage, the specific, nauseating humiliation of learning that you were replaced so gradually, you never even noticed the vacancy. Then I made an appointment with an estate attorney named Howard Blass. Howard was 70 years old, wore orthopedic shoes, and had the slow, deliberate manner of a man who'd seen every kind of family disaster there was. He listened to everything I told him, took 4 pages of notes, and then looked up and said, "The house transfer 18 months before death is very interesting to me." It was interesting to Howard because Ohio law has specific provisions regarding asset transfers made to avoid estate claims, particularly when a surviving child can demonstrate financial dependency or reasonable expectation of inheritance. I hadn't been financially dependent on my mother, but the paper trail told another story. My mother had listed me as her sole heir in a will she'd written in 2009. That will had been superseded by a new one in 2019, the same year the savings account began being emptied. Howard also noted that my mother had been diagnosed with early-stage vascular dementia in 2018, a diagnosis I had never been told about, that existed in her medical records, that Diane Follett had accompanied her to receive. That detail landed like a stone in still water. Diane Follett had known about the dementia, had been present at the diagnosis, and within 12 months my mother had signed over a house and begun emptying a savings account. Howard filed a claim of undue influence. It took 14 months. There were depositions, including one where I sat across a table from Diane Follett for the first time and watched her cry and say my mother had loved her like a daughter. I looked at her and I said, very quietly, "She had a daughter." Diane's attorney objected. I didn't care. The settlement came on a Thursday afternoon. The house could not be fully recovered. Diane had taken out a small mortgage against it, but a significant financial settlement was reached, enough to cover the drained savings account plus legal fees, plus a sum that accounted for the valuation of the transferred vehicle and jewelry. The pearl necklace and the gold bracelet were itemized specifically in the claim. Diane produced the necklace. She said she didn't know where the bracelet was. I have a feeling I know where it is. But some things you let go. What I didn't let go was this. I sent a copy of the full court filing, every page, including the dementia diagnosis and the timeline of asset transfers, to every member of the church outreach group where my mother and Diane had met. I sent it to the pastor directly. I didn't add a note. I didn't need to. The documents spoke with perfect clarity about what Diane Follett had done to a lonely, vulnerable old woman who had made the mistake of trusting her. I heard, through Bet, that Diane left that church within a month. I also went back to that notary's office, to the same man who had told me the Follets were my mother's family. I sat down across from him and I told him, very calmly, that I had filed a separate complaint with the Ohio State Bar regarding his office's failure to notify me, the named heir in a prior will, of the 2019 will revision. I had receipts. I had certified mail records. His office had my address. He'd sent me nothing. He settled that quietly, too. I went back to Mercer Street one last time before the legal proceedings closed. The house had been emptied by then, neutralized into a beige, carpeted nobody. I stood in the kitchen doorway and I tried to find my mother in the walls, in the particular slant of afternoon light through the window above the sink. I couldn't find her. I'm not sure she was ever entirely there. Not the mother I thought I knew. What I know now is this: grief is not always clean. Sometimes you mourn a person and simultaneously mourn the false version of that person you'd been carrying for decades. Both losses are real. Both cost something you cannot get back. But I got the rest back. Every dollar I could prove, every asset I could trace, every piece of paper that said my mother's name and mine in the same sentence. I had that pearl necklace restrung, and I gave it to my older daughter on her 25th birthday. I told her it had belonged to her great-grandmother, which was true. I did not tell her the rest. Not yet. She's going to ask, eventually, and when she does, I'll sit down with her and I'll say, protect what's yours. Trust carefully. And if someone tells you that you've already received your share, you make them prove it. Because some people will take everything and then tell you it was love.